There is nothing wrong with being a finance-led company, but it just takes you to a different direction than a design-led company, which means everything you do in a company is assessed through the lens of how can we make more money? And unfortunately, there are many of them. And what is even more unfortunate that traditional MBAs teach how to be a finance-led company because they are master of business administration. They raise admins. I would say we would definitely be in a better place in the world if we were much more design-led. And design in a broader sense, it's about imagining a different solution. It's imagining a different world where there are ideas bigger than what you've seen, what everyone imagined, and you believe that you can make them happen.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Today I'm speaking with Ekaterina Solomeina, who's a design expert on a mission to reshape creative leadership education through the Future London Academy. The Academy's programs focus on the unique challenges faced by senior creative leaders, such as the chief executive of design or marketing or experience or product. It teaches the sorts of things that an MBA just doesn't, which is how to navigate the intersection between creativity in an organization and profitability, ethics, and inclusivity. Ekaterina is a creative director herself, a TEDx speaker, and co-founder of Future London Academy, which offers executive short courses, corporate training, and design safaris for entrepreneurs, innovators, designers, and managers. For the past 14 years, Ekaterina has worked with top design companies and clients such as Versace, Microsoft, Walmart, IBM, and Coca-Cola, among others. In this episode, we talk about the biggest challenges and lessons for creative leaders in today's workspace, how to manage creative teams effectively, and measures and metrics for creativity and impact. We also dive into the faculty and disciplines of the Future London Academy, embracing neurodiversity as a leader, and other topics. As always, if you enjoy this episode, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, without further ado, my conversation with Ekaterina Solomeina. Ekaterina Solomeina, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I told you a little bit about the show ahead of time, but Work for Humans, we're very much exploring the idea that work is a design problem, that work is a product, and that we can use design tools to make it better. But this may come as a challenge to some companies and to some leaders, because all companies have employees, all companies deliver the product of work to those employees and have a design opportunity, but not all companies have any design capabilities inside their organization. For instance, HR departments frequently don't have any design capabilities inside their organization. So you have started an academy, the Future London Academy, that is all about executive education for creative leaders. And so I would very much love to talk to you about what creative leaders need to know and all aspects of that. So first of all, what's the origin of the Future London Academy?
Brilliant question. I love talking about our origin story because it's a very personal one. I worked in the creative industry myself as a designer, as a creative director, worked with some of the most fascinating and inspiring creative leaders that I could ever wish to meet in my life, including Michael Wolff, the founder of Wolff Olins, including Donatella Versace. And I really, really enjoyed my creative path doing design and creativity. And I worked in branding, I worked in digital, I worked in advertising across all creative aspects. But when I reached a certain point in my career, when I was already doing very well, I was winning awards, whatever doing well means in the industry, in the career, I realized that I don't know where to learn. I want to work until I'm 80, 90, whatever age I will be. But that meant that I have another good 40, 50 years ahead of me. And I don't know where to learn. Our educational system is very well catered to have this structured approach from since we are 4 years old until we're, whatever, 21, 23. And then the rest of the life, we have to figure it out ourselves. Where we're learning, how we're learning, who we're learning from, what do we need to even know at that point? And I found that frustrating, and I just wanted to create something for myself to learn. And we started doing these short programs where we would select the coolest people in the industry that would teach because I wanted to learn from them. So turned out I wasn't alone, and there were many other people who were in the same position, and the academy started growing to the point where it stopped being a side project that I was doing as a creative director, wanting to learn, and became a full business and started growing from there. And it has been an incredible journey since then.
One of the things you mentioned in some of your writing is that you admired the Bauhaus and what that was. Can you describe, first of all, for people who may not have heard about Bauhaus, what it was, but also what you admired about it?
Bauhaus, I can talk about it forever. Bauhaus, to the general population, I suppose, is most known as a movement in architecture. And we have many objects in the UK, in Europe, and in the US who are very much inspired by people who went through the Bauhaus system, who studied at Bauhaus. So Bauhaus was a place to learn. And I wouldn't call it a university, I wouldn't call it an institution, I wouldn't call it a school, because it was a place. It was definitely a place and a space in time where some of the biggest minds and most inspiring people of that time, like Kandinsky, Schlemmer, Mahoe-Nagy, they all lived there and they all taught there. So they were the painters, the artists of the time, like the celebrities. And you could physically go into their studio and learn from them because they did have their studios there and they were painting there and coming up with their ideas. They partied with students. They had all sorts of social life. It was not what education right now in universities looks like. So that was so inspiring for me to know more about each of the individual stories. And that's why it created this new breed of people. And that's why it created a whole movement of people who thought differently, who look different, their designs look different. The core idea then, and the reason why it was created, because it was happening during industrialization, which meant the big machines, the factories were affecting design. So creatives and designers who were very much craftsmen, craftswomen, they needed to rethink, what does art and design mean now that we have these factories and machines and new materials like plastic and everything else? So there was a moment in time where that needed to happen. And that's why there were a combination of different subjects. There was a lot of philosophy. There was obviously engineering subjects. There was art. There was lots of things. And as I mentioned, taught by these incredible people. And they had the best parties ever when they would dress up as planets or as geometrical shapes. It was, if you ever Google for any pictures of that time, that's hilarious. And I felt like 100 years from then, so it was 1919 when the school started. So it was 2019 when at that point we've been running Futureland Academy for about maybe 7 years or something. And we felt like this time is happening again when the industry is changing, when design is changing, where creativity is changing. Yeah, there is technology and machines and computers, but also what it means for the society, for everyday life. It's changing. It's everywhere. We all try to understand how we interact with design, what creativity means, what our jobs mean. And even people who have been trained as designers have to rethink what they do as creatives. So it felt right. And that's why we created our Design Leaders program at Future London Academy, and very much inspired by Bauhaus.
I did some research on Bauhaus coming into this because I've always been interested in Bauhaus anyway. First of all, it moved cities every couple of years. It was not stable at all. It was a classic scenius. So Brian Eno coined the term scenius. He says it's genius, but it's not the person's genius. It's the genius of the scene. It's like there's a collection of people who come together and to collectively have a genius about them. And he named a couple of different places like Vienna in a certain year or something like that. It's the idea of scenius. And it's magic to create one if it's possible. And so I would love to learn, because a lot of what you're doing is this overlap There are places where you can go to get an MFA. There are places where you can go to learn design, and there are places where you can go to learn business. But what you're focused on is the overlap of the two. It's the unique challenges faced by creative leaders. And what are those challenges? And I can imagine them coming from a couple of different places. One is, I got an MFA, I rose to a position of leadership, I've never studied business. Or, I'm a business person, I'm responsible for this creative team, how do I manage it? So, first of all, what are those challenges that people are facing?
I love that you already mentioned the journey of a creative person and how they might realize that there are certain areas like business and leadership, something that they're more curious about that now is part of their job. And this is very much one of the insights that we had and why we created the program, that when you get to that point, when you become an executive creative director, head of design, head of innovation, whatever is the highest creative title within your organization, you find yourself in those meetings and boardrooms with CEOs and CFOs and business leaders who care about very different things than what you used to and talk a very different language. So you kind of constantly feel like you lack the context and the language to collaborate with them in a productive way, same as you've been doing throughout your career with all your creative peers. So you've succeeded throughout this journey, and now this new step on your journey, and you need to figure out how to talk to these people and how to really understand them, to collaborate with them. So there are a few things that you need to think about from that context. And our program was very much structured around those layers. So we created 5, essentially. If you think of Bauhaus, if we're going back to the Bauhaus metaphor, we had 5 layers of Bauhaus, which is being better person, building better products, building better teams, better company, and better world. And very much each of them is focused on certain things that creative leaders face throughout their career and when they get to that point. So being better human is basically about the fact that you're right, you're looking after the team, you need to manage people. There are so many, you need more leadership skills. You need to understand who you are as a leader. And also, how can you be a better leader and better collaborator and better person to your team? And these are non-linear questions. There is no one answer to that. I wish there was just one book you could read and become better at everything, at being a human. So that's the core. And until you understand who you are and how do you operate, it's pointless talking about design, business, anything else. I think you very much need to understand that core. Building better products is all about the fact that as a creatives, we very much learn how to create incredible designs, whether it is interior, architecture, building, branding, physical product, industrial design, whatever. We learn how to build product. As you said, you might go to a design school, MFA, whatever. You learn how the craft works. Now, the world changes, the industry changes, and it's not enough just to be good at it. You constantly need to understand how you can be better at it. How can you inspire the team to create better work? How do you not become complacent? How do you understand the world of data, technology, and all these new exciting opportunities from AI to metaverses of the world? So how does that change what you do, your creative process, your outcomes, your products? Then the next layer about building better teams, and that comes from the challenge that our teams are distributed now. Our teams are global. Our teams are different than what we grew up with as being a team member. So now we are leading the teams that we've never been part of ourselves before. We all try to model our behaviors from the leaders that we had in the past, but we never encountered a situation like we are now. So how are we supposed to know how to create a culture in an organization that is in so many different cultures? How to think about cross-collaboration between people, how to think about inclusivity in a broader sense, because we're not talking about the traditional big giants of diversity, but also about the neurodiversity and other things that now are more visible within the workspace. So how can we create inclusive environment? So then we talked about being better human, building better products, building better teams, better companies is the next layer. And what does it mean to build a better company? So first, you need to understand how to build a company. So that means understanding finance, operations, all the business metrics. I suppose that's what the typical MBAs are focused on, all the numbers things that creatives usually try to stay away from. But when you get to that level within your company, if you're running your own company as a creative, you have your own creative agency or consultancy, you need to understand the numbers. It's the reality, unfortunately, you have to face. Now, you don't need to become a CFO, but you need to understand how to talk to a CFO so you actually understand what they're talking about. And that is incredibly important and definitely something that can make a difference in your career and in your company when you actually understand the basics of the numbers.
A point on that one. I can't remember who it was who said this. Sculpture is made with stone. Paintings are made with paint. Movies are made with money. And so a lot of the creative work that we do, especially the very large creative work, is made with money. And you do need to be able to speak to the CFO.
And they're not as scary as they seem, by the way. They're absolutely lovely humans. But I think there is this typical tension between the finance team and the creative team. But again, that's all solvable. And I'm sure we'll talk about all the things, how to think about that and what could be a practical advice for someone who is struggling with talking about business and talking about money. And then the last layer, which is about building a better world, is something that is incredibly important for us and something that definitely no current educational programs or executive MBAs even talk about. They have maybe a lecture on sustainability, like a little squeezed in talk about, look, you can't pollute the planet. But no one really believes in it as much as we do in terms of how much power creatives and creative leaders actually have in terms of what world we will live in. Everything that's around us right now was built by creatives, one way or another. So it only makes sense for creative leaders to understand how they can build products, environments, anything that they do to actually improve the world we live in. And for that, you need to understand a bigger context, not just design and sustainability in the most typical way, but you need to understand how your products and services affect communities and cultures and geopolitics. So we have actually politicians who teach on the program about taxes and trading relationships and all of these things. As creatives working for a global company or wanting to build a product or a service that will be global, you have to understand the global perspective, as well as ethics, which is, again, a non-linear question. And we have lots of philosophical debates when it comes to ethics during the module, because there is no one way to approach it, but we need to have those conversations. That's the only way we will actually move the world forward in the right direction. So that was not so short answer, but hopefully that gave some perspective.
And there's a lot of things I want to go back through. On the last point, we had Don Norman on the show. So we interviewed Don Norman, who wrote The Design of Everyday Things. And his most recent book was The Design for Humanity. And a part of our discussion was how important it was. He was talking about the circular economy and creating an economy that was not extractive, but was regenerative. And the importance of design in making the circular economy so convenient for people that it was easy to fall into that circular economy. I'm not sure we agreed on it, actually. I have to go back and listen. But the power of designers to create even convenience is incredibly influential. So going back into the pieces, building better teams. So I'm imagining a company. I've never had a creative team before. Now I'm the CEO. I'm going to hire a creative lead who's going to be the designer of the experience of work. That's sort of how I'm imagining. And in my experience of managing creatives, which I haven't done very often, but when I have, they're totally different to manage. I mean, totally. And quite high maintenance. And I say that in a loving way. But they are engaging with their work at an aesthetic and an emotional level and an empathetic level. And so when you say something isn't right, you're not just saying it's not functional. You're striking at something that they may not even be able to explain to you why it's important to them. And so I wonder if that's a topic of conversation about how to handle teams that are made of creatives.
Brilliant question. And I suppose there are two parts to this answer, because one thing that we encourage creatives on all of our courses and programs, and specifically on this one, is actually to learn how to communicate what you do and why that is important. Because you're right, so many times creatives feel passionate and emotional about something that cannot necessarily explain in the terms that will be apparent to someone who comes from a business background or from tech background or from some other place that, again, operates in different terms. But there is always a logical explanation. It's just sometimes you're not able to articulate it. And I forgot who said that communication is not an additional skill, it's part of your job. So you can't say, for example, I'm good at design, but I'm bad at communication. If you cannot communicate, that means you're bad at design. Because part of doing any job is also communicating what are you doing, how you're doing, who you're doing it with, what for, because that's what is your job. So you can't just do something in abstract that is amazing idea if you cannot collaborate and communicate with others. So one thing is actually creatives do need to learn how to communicate their value. I mean, they don't need to figure it out on their own. There are so many people already who learned it and who done it, from understanding how design actually affects bottom line and the business metrics and revenue. Everything can be measured as long as you know where to look. If you want to talk about efficiency, it all depends what company cares about or specific person that you talk about. If you're talking to a developer, then probably they'll maybe looking at efficiency or elegance of the code or some sort of other thing that you also need to understand. So number one is actually learning communication for both sides. I think it's probably universal for any job. And we all as humans, I think, should just ask each other, why do you care about? Like, what if someone pushes you back, whether it's CFO who doesn't want to give you extra budget for this extra thing that you like? You really need to get curious. Why do they care about that? What does it mean for them? And how can you explain the thing that you want to do in the terms that they understand and will care about? So it might be that, again, it's a big upfront cost, but it will save money long term. Maybe it's actually creates a bigger brand awareness. So it's more expensive, but the sales will be up because this is a unique market proposition. There are so many ways that, again, you can talk about design in a very business terms. It's just a question of language. So one, I would say creatives need to learn that. Now, the second part, how to work with creatives. If you have a creative team, that's a interesting topic of conversation, because you're right. Creatives in general, there are different types of creatives. There are very analytical creatives. And actually, every person is creative in their own way. There are very creative CFOs. There are very creative kind of any profession in any role. But I suppose what we call them craftspeople, or people who were trained to do a creative job, obviously that's their default scenario, to be creative and to come up with things that no one thought of before. So of course they will be connecting and unconnecting things. That's their job. They're very good at seeing this big picture and connecting the dots. And that's the strength of creative people, of mixing things that no one mixed before and just seeing things from a different perspective, which means that they might also look at everything you bring to them from a very different perspective than what you expected. So yeah, just understanding that. And empathy and human perspective is very important for any creative leader. Again, we are trained as part of design. If anyone was trained as a designer, you need to learn about the user, the research, understanding what the person feels and wants. And we operate in those terms. We try to understand the human behind the product or the service we are building, who will interact with it. So that is something that actually, again, is very good for business, to understand the user. But it might sound fluffy for someone who haven't been in the environment, but actually it's good for business.
I can see that one of the absolutely critical translation skills is translating from customer need through whatever the thing is being designed is to leadership. And I've found that very difficult in the past, which is when you're doing, for instance, user research, you immerse yourself so deeply in the experience of users, and you move in with users in some cases. You meet with them, you follow them, you interview them, and you develop a native empathy for what they are facing. And you feel their pain and you feel their joy, right? You feel those things. And now what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to carry that back to people who have funding, in most cases. And it is as much a creative act telling the story of the user as it is building the thing for the user. So it's a beautiful path. I mean, it's a path from a really grounded understanding of people, but then being able to communicate it in a way to tell that story.
You're so right.
What does your faculty look like? Who do you bring in to teach this sort of thing?
In a very Bauhaus manner, we wanted to bring the best out of the best, the celebrities of now and the people that everyone admires in the industry to teach what's happening in design, in innovation, in finance, in anything, in any subject that we touch. And we have some incredible people from Michael Wolff, my obviously favorite person in the entire world, founder of Wolff Olins. We have James Hilton, the founder of AKQA. We have Bidisha, who is a senior director at Zaha Hadid Architects. We've got incredible companies who are doing something interesting right now, who are transforming the world, who are approaching creativity in a different way. And we get their teams to talk about how they work, as well as people in the cohort challenge each other because they come from a professional perspective, from different countries, from different companies and environments. So together with the experts that are in the room, the conversations that happen are magical because even the best experts, they always admit they don't know the right answers. This is how they do it. And they want to share how they've done it and how they've succeeded. It doesn't mean that repeating the same thing will create the same success in the future. Only you as a person will know what makes sense for you, for your team, for your product, for you as a human. And our goal and our purpose is to bring as many of those perspectives in the room to make sure that by the time you finish the program, you know the how, the practical skills, but also you really understand what's right for you and what does it mean for you to build something that is future focused and can actually do some difference in the world.
And the disciplines of the faculty, because I'm not from that world, you named people I don't recognize. And so you might have creative directors of a product line. You might have directors of a film studio. So what are the industries?
Thank you for asking that because I sometimes get too excited whether I talk about Bauhaus and start naming names of people that I admire, whether I talk about our faculty, and I realize that probably to the general population, those names might not mean much. But yeah, we bring the best companies from all industries, and that's one of the things that is very important for us, that creative industry is very broad, from fashion to architecture to brand to digital. There are so many facets of a creative industry, and it's important for us that we bring founders, CEOs, CFOs, all the C-level teams from all these different types of creative companies. We call it design-led companies, which means it doesn't necessarily mean it's a creative agency in the most traditional sense, but it could be a tech company like Airbnb or Dropbox or someone who really values design and that really values that creative approach, or Apple, I suppose, the most typical example. We want to make sure that we bring those different leaders, and all the people who teach in the program usually are C-level. So it's CEOs, CFOs, chief design officers, chief creative officers, chief operating officers. So people who got to the top of those companies and actually can see through the lens of their experience and all their previous experiences as well, what actually works and how can anyone sitting in the room use their approach to apply to whatever they're building.
I like that phrase, design-led companies. I'm going through my head of companies that I feel are design-led. Apple's a classic example. I think that they essentially established the brand of design-led companies. And I will tell you, I know some of the people who were involved in the early days of design at Apple, and divergent is the right word for who they were. They were very divergent. They were the kind of people who, hard to even imagine them in a corporation because of who they were. They got so deep, for instance, into fonts, into calligraphy, and into that sort of thing to understand how to make things right. I think of teenage engineering, which I just have such a crush on teenage engineering as a design-led company. I don't even know what their products do. They're just so cool, man. They are so cool. So when I think about these design-led companies, a part of what that means is that the creative lead is going to be much higher in the organization than you might find in companies who are not design-led, but have a design component.
Very true. And that is definitely one aspect that differentiates those companies, where it's Brian Chesky being the founder CEO of Airbnb, being trained as a designer, and that's basically he leads the company through the lens of design. Again, Steve Jobs, classic example, he cared a lot about fonts, as you said, and typography. In general, I would say first we can start with what is not a design-led company. What's the opposite of a design-led company? Which is a finance-led company. And there is nothing wrong with being a finance-led company, but it just takes you to a different direction than a design-led company, which means everything you do in a company is assessed through the lens of how can we make more money, how we can cut costs or make more money. And this is our only goal. We don't have any other goals. I think every company always has the finance aspect, and that's why they're called companies and businesses, because they make money. But if this is your only purpose in the world, then you're definitely not a design-led company. I would start there. And unfortunately, there are many of them. And what is even more unfortunate, that traditional MBAs teach how to be a finance-led company because they are master of business administration. They raise admins who want to administrate what's going on, put column numbers from one column to another. And there is no inspiration, innovation in that. And some companies potentially need to be finance-led, but I would say we would definitely be in a better place in the world if we were much more design-led. And design in a broader sense, it doesn't always mean beautiful graphics and packaging. I feel like there are so many misconceptions about what design is, that it's something cute and it's all about fonts or graphics or something like that. But it is about imagination. It's about imagining a different solution. It's imagining something that is not obvious. Imagine something no one has done before. Imagine something that is maybe opposite to what everyone wants to do, but you believe in it because you know it's right. It's imagining a different world where there are ideas bigger than what you've seen, what everyone imagined, and you believe that you can make them happen. So that's what a design-led company is. And for that, you need people with imagination, with empathy, with ideas to be at the top. So they add to the conversations at the top all these groundbreaking ideas, innovations, new approaches, things that are more sustainable, things that are better for the environments, things that are changing people and cultures in a good way. So that's what a design-led company is.
I can imagine companies that are not design-led, and one would be a commodity company. So you're selling pork bellies. I don't know. You're selling coffee beans. Your product has been commoditized. What you really want out of it is that it's the same every time. It's predictable. And
I want to argue that point, but keep going. I want to hear your perspective.
Well, I mean, and so, yeah, you're going to take those coffee beans and you're going to put them in a bag, and you can design the bag and you might design how you deliver them. But it's as you move into delivering experiences that you get farther away. So a company that is primarily focused on goods, delivering goods as a commodity, is primarily focused on cost savings. At least that's what I've read.
You are right in many ways that at the current state of the world, that's most likely the case. That is correct. Now, it doesn't mean it needs to be that way. That's exactly what we're trying to say. And that's a common misconception that design means visual design. And it doesn't mean that necessarily. So if we take an example of Coffee Beans Company, let's talk about supply chain. And actually, we teach supply chain during our program because supply chains are so broken at the moment. There is so much design and innovation that needs to happen in supply chain. Where these beans are coming from, what's the best way, most ethical way, and doesn't mean most expensive, but the most efficient and ethical way to create the ecosystem where this product can be created. So there are many ways where design can help in a process space, in a strategy space, in a supply chain space, any space. So to be a design-led company doesn't always mean to have great visual design. It just means thinking differently about how you do your business.
And a part of that thinking differently then is thinking about the first person experience of the people who are engaged in your business. And that first person experience doesn't have to be through visual design. It can be through lots of things. So is that an accurate representation of being design led?
Very much so. I would say, with only caveat, that what usually happens when that process starts evolving, and by the way, lots of companies who are non-design led can transition into being design led companies. That's actually what is happening in the industry now. And part of our mission is to make sure that people who come through our program can transform their organizations into being design led, which actually will be, again, better from the financial perspective, better from the environmental perspective, from all perspectives. But going back to the question, where does visual design also come into that? It usually happens that when you get those creatives at the top, they start caring about the user, the empathy, the what's right, but also about the visual design. Because if you think of it, and we are not talking about embellishing in kind of the striking visual design, but readability, accessibility, it's very much a design problem. Let's talk about these bean bags. How are they marked? How are they labeled? Is it easy to make sure that they transported and not confused with any other goods? I don't know, whatever problems there are, it's also a design problem and can be a visual design problem. I don't want to dismiss visual design as not an important part of design, because it is, but I also don't want to limit design to the visual design.
I think that's very important, not just visual design, but product design, which is that there are things that are designed that are services, that are experiences, that are transformations, not just things. And there are a lot of design companies that do focus on things. And when they do, it's sometimes hard to get them to not do that. Do you teach measures and metrics? And what do you teach about those?
Brilliant question, because that's something that I suppose, again, going back to the metaphor of Bauhaus and what matters in the industrialization, I suppose what matters in the world we live in now is metrics. Whether you want it or not, someone at the top of the company will be looking at the data metrics, at the sales metrics. Now that we can measure things, we are starting being slightly obsessed about measuring things. So if you are a creative, then you definitely need to understand metrics and what to measure. Now, obviously, there are metrics that any person working in business knows that are important, whether it's customer acquisition cost, or whether it's lifetime value of a customer, TAM, total addressable market. So these are the metrics that I suppose very typical in a business environment. And as a creative, you need to know that that's what people care about. So therefore, you need to know them and how your work is connected to any of them, whether you are reducing customer acquisition cost or whether you're increasing customer lifetime value or you're addressing a bigger market. So you can measure it and therefore justify your decisions. Now, it would be boring, as we said, to live in the world where all we measure is financial metrics. That would be a wrong way to run a company. So there is a second, I suppose, pillar of this metric equation, which is about design metrics. And more companies are now looking at design metrics. And that could be something to do with accessibility, how accessible certain product is, because basically it's direct influence of design and you can't put it necessarily as a business metric. Or how long does it take to complete a certain task? If we're talking about user experience in digital environment, let's say if someone is building an app or e-commerce website, whatever that is, and all people want, or booking engine, I suppose, better example. All we want is to book our flight, and we do not want to spend hours and hours searching and booking the flight. So as designers, we can solve this problem because we are building the website, the app, whatever we are building, together obviously with the team of developers, product people, but we can imagine how to do this faster. So this is a second set of design metric. Now, what's really interesting, and not so many companies even think about, is more global, we can call them human metrics, world metrics, something that is beyond the business and the design. And going back to our overall ethos that we want to create companies to make a positive change, we should measure what kind of difference we are making as companies, as leaders in companies, as designers in companies. And that's a tricky one. A great example of that would be a company like Headspace. They actually measure things like mental health and well-being, They look at WHO reports in terms of what is current state of health and well-being, and therefore how they as a company can measure and can contribute to improvement of those metrics. So therefore, they obviously care about the business metrics to make sure that they can pay salaries and they can build products. They care about how usable their app is, but they don't want to be stuck in how many downloads they have and how long people spend in the app, because that would be a wrong thing to build. They care about what impact this app and this product actually makes in the world. And we believe that's how companies should approach how they run businesses.
There's one person that I had on the show, Fred Reichheld, and he's the person who invented the Net Promoter Score and really championed the idea of customer loyalty and loving your customer. And I think it's very related. I mean, he's a very businessy sort of person. He's very much about bottom line and top line and all of that. But what he did is he mapped what's the emotional state that you want to create in every part of the business system. And the emotional state that not necessarily all the employees, but the company should manifest is love toward the customer. And that in return, the customer may not love you back, but will feel loyalty. And so he has a set of measures. One of them is essentially earned revenue. Earned revenue is not how much you made. It's partially about how many customers were retained. And so it's not just how much your company grew, it's how much of your growth was on top of customers who came back. And that, first of all, this idea that the very dollars and sort of approach and sense approach that he's taking toward business should manifest as emotional states. It's a very design-like way of thinking about business, which is what emotional state are we all going to strive for?
I love that you brought up Net Promotion Score, because I think it's a metric that a lot of companies use, which is a good thing, because I think finally there are some measurements in terms of what, again, design can bring to the equation and creativity can bring to the equation, because it definitely affects NPS. And right now, if we talked about these three pillars about business metrics, design metrics, and human metrics, it sits somewhere in between, or sometimes in both. In business metrics, because as you rightly said, it does affect the revenue. So that's great for the business side. Obviously, it affects the design. Have you created the experience that people love, that people care about? So that's very much a design metric. And now I think what we see companies they're doing, they're trying to get more nuanced with that. Because as we know, people always say what they feel and what they think. So it's a big question, and lots of companies approach it in a different way and finding their own answers. How do you actually measure and find out what people feel about your company? Not what they said they feel, but what do they actually feel? And I don't think there is one answer, but there are companies who are doing very interesting things in the area.
Yeah, and he would say that most people who have adopted Net Promoter Score have done it wrong. That's why he wrote his 8th book, is to say, no.
Ooh. I need to read then his new book. I would be so curious, especially from someone who created the whole measurement. I think I definitely would love to hear his evolution of an idea, because with any idea, I feel like you put it in the world and people take it so differently and you're like, no, it's not what I meant. So I would love to hear his thinking.
It's a book called Winning on Purpose. Or you can just listen to the episode.
I'll do both.
In some of your writing, you've spoken about, or in our previous conversations, neurodiversity and the importance of thinking about neurodiversity as a creative leader. Is it something that you think is specific to creative leaders, or is it just all leaders should be good at this, at understanding the differences between people?
Yes and yes. I would say all leaders need to be aware of neurodiversity and in general, how to be more inclusive, whether it is different types of people, journeys, backgrounds, or is it different brains that they have on the team. So all leaders need to understand how to be inclusive and actually understand what's going on in people's lives. Specifically, neurodiversity, I suppose it kind of gained popularity recently and more people talking about it, which is great. It's just a positive change. And definitely more people are aware whether that they are neurodiverse or they work with neurodiverse people. I suppose the most typical for those who are not familiar with neurodiversity essentially means that your brain is different, it's slightly different from other brains. And The most common things people hear around neurodiversity is ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism. So all of that falls under the umbrella of neurodiversity. But what it means is just a different brain. The brain is wired differently, which for a creative is a great thing because creatives are expected to be wired differently and come up with different ideas and thoughts and all these brilliant concepts. So yes, in creative industry, you're more likely to meet neurodiverse people. They're more concentrated there because it's probably more natural for someone who's neurodiverse to go into the creative field. But they're everywhere. I'm sure there are plenty of neurodiverse people who you would not expect. The problem actually with neurodiversity is not as visible and people mask it a lot. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term of masking, it's when you basically hide that you are different and try to be like everyone else around you, which is not good long term because it just takes more energy. I suppose the parallel I would do is when introverts try to look like they're extroverts, and it's exhausting. Some of people can do it, but then you just feel like you have no energy. So same with any neurodiverse condition. People who are successful, who didn't realize they were neurodiverse, it's probably because they were very good at masking it. They came at the cost of their health, their energy levels, or something else, but they figured it out. But it doesn't need to be that way. We can all create environments where everyone feels great and feels their best version of themselves. And as leaders, we need to create those environments.
It also seems to me it ties to understanding yourself, which was the very first building block in being a better person, which is understanding who you are, what makes you different, and why that's okay.
I'm glad you said, why is it okay? Because that's one thing that actually is very helpful with the topic of neurodiversity becoming more public. That suddenly, when you learn about all these different conditions and what this might look like in day-to-day life, because we have very stereotypical understanding of all these different conditions, let's say ADHD, we think someone is just running around like crazy or can't concentrate. But actually, ADHD means you can concentrate very well and you have actually this very much tunnel way of concentration when you don't even notice anything around you, with the only condition that you're very interested in and engage with the subject. Now, when you're not engaged with the subject, then you will be concentrated on all the other things around you that are more interesting than the subject in front of you. That is also true. But this misconception form very strange opinion of people with different conditions, but also confuses the person themselves. I'm sure you've had friends who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who now finally diagnosed with ADHD or autism or anything else. And it is actually, a lot of them say it's a relief because they realize that there was nothing wrong with them. Their brain is just wired differently. And I want to repeat, it doesn't mean it wired badly. It's wired differently, which is very important.
That description of ADHD, I feel so seen. I was diagnosed at 58 and did not understand what that meant, right? It's made a huge difference. So I have some closing questions I ask at the very end of every show, and I can't remember if I prepared you for this closing question or not, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
Oh, it's definitely not one answer. It's definitely not just a hole in the wall. And I was actually reflecting on that recently for the reason we've been around for now 11 plus years. And as a founder, you constantly want to check in. Am I still doing what I actually enjoy doing and I want to be doing? Because it's very easy. Someone said living 9 to 5 for 24/7. And it is a choice that you make because you feel like it will be better for you, as well as obviously creating something that you love. But you need to check in constantly. Does it still do the job that you wanted it to do? And I can 100% say yes. Now, what is this job? I suppose there are a few aspects that I know about myself that now that I reflected back on my life, clearly were part of it, which is community. I always loved bringing people together. I love talking to people. I love being in a place where lots of inspiring people gather. That since I was a kid, that always has been something that I loved. In every job that I had, when I was a hired employee, I always found opportunities to do that, no matter what I was doing. So bringing people together and seeing the magic happen, whether it is online or offline, by physically connecting people is something that is very important to me. And I'm glad that this is part of my job. It's literally what we do every day. So that is very much fulfilled. Now, what I did not expect is the change that we will be able to make with what we do. And I suppose it's very ambitious as a founder to try to create a positive difference and believe that you can do it. But it is important for me to, considering I spent a lot of time in the company and with the team, to make sure that all this time is actually spent on something that creates a positive change. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it all? And that's seeing the results, seeing the stories of people who go through our programs, what they do next, how they succeed, how on a very personal level they send us messages and emails, how much it transformed them and help them discover who they are, find a new path, start a company they always dreamt about, progress in the company in a way they never thought of before, but also create something that changes other people, that helps other communities. And they continue the cycle of help and inspiration and transformation. So that's something that I didn't know that would be part of my job. I could only wish that this job would do for me. And every time I get a message, an email, or see a photo, we have WhatsApp groups with everyone of people doing something great, I feel very warm on the inside knowing that I definitely found the right job for me.
What does your job cost you?
Oh, such a great question. It's an emotional job. You cannot work with people and not be emotional. So I feel all the good emotions with everyone when everyone feels great, and for everyone that doesn't feel good. It's a very emotional place to be in, especially that I love being around people and I want to be with people. And I'm actually introverted. I say I like bringing people together, but I'm one of those introverted extroverts who love being around people for a certain amount of time and then needs to hide in the closet for a bit and then come out again. And I suppose being mindful of also if I'm too extroverted at any point and I need to reset is also something that I started noticing and try to be more cautious about. But a lot of emotions, I would say that's what it costs me.
Yes. It's on one of the hazards of being I think, design-oriented is empathy, which is, of course, a wonderful thing to experience, but it's also, there's a lot of emotional labor that's associated with being empathetic. That might actually be something that creative leaders need to learn, is how to manage empathy, the energy that's required by empathy.
100%. We actually do have a class on managing energy. So we have classes on resilience and managing energy. What I can say, and I definitely improved my own perspective on that and my tools, how to deal with it. But I haven't met a single person in this world who nailed it to the point that they still can experience love and great emotions and can recover from bad emotions in half of a second.
Where can people learn more about Future London Academy and about you?
Please check out futurelondonacademy.com. So it's futurelondonacademy.com. You can see all of our courses and programs, not just Design Leaders program that I talked about so much today, but all of our online courses and short courses and everything else. We have amazing Instagram where we share lots of inspiration from leaders that we meet. So if you're more of a casual learner, check out Future London Academy on Instagram. And you can search my name. My name is quite unique. So Ekaterina Solomeina, if you search me on LinkedIn, you'll probably find me. I am super friendly. I love meeting people. I love when people message me, invite me for a coffee. I'm in London, so if you're ever in London, come say hi. And I love meeting curious and inspiring people, so you're always welcome.
Thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Dad.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.